Alrighty, welcome back to Shut Up and Ball. I am Aaron Chow, accompanied by my co-host John Harris, as always, and we are back this week to share our thoughts, reactions, etc. to Week 2 of the NFL season here. And as always, did not disappoint and such. And kind of like last week, one of us, in terms of our personal teams, happy. The other one probably maybe not so, but we'll see. We'll dive further into that as we'll go over every game. Some games will take longer than others. Some might be more swift. But anyhow, John, let's start in order at the top with the Thursday night game. It was the Buffalo Bills. They managed to beat the Dolphins 31-10. Obviously, the bigger story here, of course, is Tua unfortunately suffered another concussion, and for those that don't know or need a quick reminder, he's had a couple before. It's been an issue. So and obviously as of today, they placed him on IR. So yeah, this game basically just a nightmare result for the Dolphins. But what were your thoughts on it and such?
Awful game from the Dolphins. Defensively, they could not stop James Cook. That guy was able to do whatever he wanted in that first half, getting 3 touchdowns. So that was tough. And then once the Bills got out to that big lead, they really just didn't have to do much, quite frankly, after that. The Dolphins are just playing from behind for so long. And for the Dolphins, they didn't look great either. They didn't look great either. They didn't look great when it came to the passing game. Tua, only 145 yards. He did have 1 touchdown, but he also threw 3 picks, and they were all really bad. And it was before the injury happened. So he was healthy and ready to go. And not great picks. One of them was clear triple coverage. Another, he just completely skied it over, I believe it was Robbie Chosen. So, I don't know. It just seemed like he wasn't able to get Tyreek involved. He wasn't really able to get Jalen Waddle involved. I mean, well, actually, he wasn't. He threw 4 targets to Jalen Waddle, and Waddle caught all 4 of them. So it felt like maybe Waddle should have been more involved than he was. But yeah, simply put, they just weren't able to move the ball through the air. So it became the Devon Achane show, whether it was dump offs, in the passing game, or just allowing him to run the ball 22 times. But the issue with that is that you were fighting an uphill battle the entire game because of what happened in that first half. So it wasn't great, and then Skylar Thompson had to come in, and we've seen him before, and I just don't think it's ever really looked good in Miami whenever he's had to be the starter. I think they should look for outside help if Tua can't play, which the reports are that Tua is going to be placed on IR because they're going to give him time to go talk to a neurologist, which I think is a good move because, listen, we've had our critiques of him and, whatever and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to the health, I remember, as I live in Austin, got to watch UT football. David Ash, quarterback, played there. Really good quarterback, had so many concussions that he had to retire. And it's just one of those things where you don't want to risk it. You want to be there for your family down the road. You don't want to, in 20 years from now, literally not be able to remember stuff at the age of 40. That's just not something you want to be doing. So I don't know. I'm not a neurologist. I don't know what they would say. But considering how many concussions he's had over the last 12 months and, also just being realistic, the way that he got this one was he dove headfirst into a defender. I don't know if he knows how to slide or if he knows the proper technique or whatever. I just don't know for his own sake if he should be playing again. Now, once again, I'm not a neurologist. They say he's good to go. He's good to go. But it feels bad to have this inevitability where it feels like every game Tua could get a concussion and that could be a life-changing moment. So yeah, good win for the Bills. For the Dolphins, I don't know what they do moving forward. We'll see on the Tua situation. Everything I've heard from him seems to be that he doesn't plan to retire, but I guess we'll see after he has some further discussions because once again, we've seen players who get this many concussions in this short a span, and it's bad.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on that, remember even my own teammate like Jalen Phillips in college, part of why he was almost medically retired because he had 2 or 3 concussions, and he had to even take a year off. And then on top of the David Ash ordeal. But in regards to the game, you kind of hit it all. There wasn't much to say. It was a tough game. I will say too, the Bills, we kind of alluded to, we both picked Buffalo. Bills defense, Sean McDermott, they know how to defend this McDaniel scheme, like you mentioned. Even before the injury, it was not a great night for them offensively. And it was tough going. And even Bills got a couple of, I only got one sack on Tua, but they were getting pressure there too. And the run game I know looks good for Achan, 22 for 96. But as you mentioned, like the turnovers by that time, a couple of those turnovers happened. I mean, halftime it was 24-10, and the Miami defense was not looking like they were going to make any stops, unfortunately. And so yeah, there's not much else to add there. In regards to the Tua thing, I think you hit it perfectly. Like we'll see what him, his family, his team, and obviously doctors, how they know more than we do probably in regards to how to want to handle it, and obviously it's his decision at the end of the day as to what what decision he's going to make going forward and how they want to handle that. So yeah, it's a good thing. We mentioned it. I know I mentioned it for sure. I'm sure you did too. Like when he got his contract, good. When we say good for them, the reasons like this are why we all know the report. He's gonna get his guarantees no matter what. And yeah, I mean it's obvious that he does want to play football. It's his passion. It's just we'll see what course they have to take. But I think this goes to show too, like, and we'll talk. This will be a common topic, but we mentioned some of these teams got off to a slow start. I know it's only week 2, but it's why one of these reasons why you build in the trenches and such because injuries happen in this league, and that's obvious. Like you alluded to, Skylar Thompson's not going to be the answer, and for the most part, this Miami team's kind of all in regards to being a playoff team and such. The way that the roster is constructed, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see what path they take. Maybe I don't know what. I know Ryan Tannehill's a thought, but I just don't think he fits this offense because he doesn't have the quick release, and obviously he's as young as he used to be. And I'm sure Dolphin fans don't have a great taste in their mouth after what went down with him in regards to it didn't work out after his extension. So yeah, it'll be interesting there. And sorry, one last thing too on the Tua thing, which was a little bit concerning too, was that like it's not even that like Damar Hamlin laid the boom. Like Tua, like you mentioned, lowered his head, and we saw, to his credit in regards to sliding, because it's something that I had friends over this Sunday. They mentioned it for other games. Not a lot of quarterbacks are really sliding very well. A lot are going kind of head first. I'm not really sure why. But yeah, this one was definitely like I alluded to. It just wasn't even like a crazy hit too, because we've seen some guys take some, and even Tua himself. A couple of them were result of bad hit or him getting pushed down, and one was like his head bouncing on the turf. This one was it's just scary in terms of that optic in regards to just kind of like a routine play, and ironically, obviously Damar Hamlin was on the other end. So, yeah, we'll see what directions the Dolphins take going forward. I mean, they've had a lot go on the past couple weeks with Tyreek Hill, getting and Calais Campbell, getting detained right outside the stadium week 1. The motions of that, and still dealing with that going into this game, and then now on top of that, you don't have your quarterback at least for 4 weeks, and who knows, obviously the long-term status. So. Yeah, and for the Bills, obviously, shout out to their fans too, because they all like contributed to his fundraiser and whatnot. So, yeah, kudos to them and that fan group, W fan group there. So, anything else before I move us forward onto the Sunday games, John?
No, that's pretty much it. I mean, yeah, if you're a Miami Dolphins fan, hope you're prepared for whatever the scenario is, because I will say if Tua does choose to retire, things could get ugly over in Miami pretty quick, because they clearly have not prepared an alternative plan.
Yeah, like they built this team around basically around him and that style.
Yeah.
So, and it's not easy to switch gears mid beginning of the season. So anyway, there's that. Let's move on down. And ironically, technically, remember, just want to point out to everyone out there, I'm not doing this to hurt John, but we are starting with the Dallas game as the New Orleans Saints, a team that many of us felt that okay, they blew out the Panthers week 1, but they're going to face a real team in the Cowboys. Well, Saints, they are off to a hot start as they beat the Cowboys 44-19. I mean, it seems like Alvin Kamara's back and Derek Carr can do no wrong and such. So obviously, you watched this game as a Cowboys fan, I'm sure in depth. What were your thoughts on this result?
Yeah, on paper, I will say I've heard some of my friends already say Dak looks pretty bad, and it's like, well, if you actually watch the game, the Cowboys' offense was not the issue here. Sure, they only scored 19 points, and but the problem was the Saints, literally every drive they touched the ball, For the first 3 quarters, they scored a touchdown. Every single one. Every time they touched the ball, they scored a touchdown. And that is impossible to go against, realistically. Like, Dallas would have had to play perfect football on offense in order to combat New Orleans here. Dak did throw 2 picks. One of them was not his fault at all. The first one, that was, and even there's the clip going viral of Tom Brady where the young receiver, Jalen Brooks, he completely lost his footing on what should have been a very clear catch and first down. And instead, he completely falls. Dak's already released the ball before he falls, and the corner picks it off because obviously the receiver's not there to contest him whatsoever. So that one's on a Dak. Tom Brady afterwards talking about how now you don't go back to the young receiver this game, blah, blah, blah. So that one's on Brooks. The second one, Dak definitely forced it, but once again, like, you're just trying to make huge plays because, like, you're down so big. So, yeah, like, the offense, they weren't perfect. Even some of the drives, like, there was one where the offensive line let Dak get strip sacked, but then Tolbert recovered it. But then, that was a 3rd down, so they have to settle for a field goal. Like, a bunch of just like small mistakes like that are happening, where the Saints on the other end, they're not making those mistakes. They literally, whatever they wanted to do, whether it was through the run game with Alvin Kamara, which was kind of the lifeblood of the offense. I know that Derek Carr had a great stat line, but realistically, it was Alvin Kamara absolutely torching this Dallas defense. They could not stop the run whatsoever. And then that off of it opened up the pass game. I mean, as you can see, like, Chris Olave had his 39-yard catch. Rashid Shaheed had that 70-yard bomb for the touchdown. Those are big play-action plays that led to those receptions. And once again, it was all off of Kamara. He was doing so well that Zimmer is obviously pushing a lot of the attention towards the run game because they can't stop it. And then that just opens up the play-action pass deep down the field, and the safeties were getting beat. So, yeah, and then even Kamara had that one like dump off that went for 57 and a tutty. So, yeah, it was a terrible game. I'm hoping this isn't the norm because against Cleveland, the defense looked significantly better. And I'm just worried that maybe the Saints, which shout out to their offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak, have figured something out about this Dallas defense that could be used by a lot of other teams in the future. I'm hoping that's not the case, and this was just some sort of freak thing where Dallas was clearly not prepared for what the Saints were going to come in and offer, and they clean things up next week after they watch film. But I won't lie, the Saints pretty much manhandled them. So
and I think it's ironic you mentioned Kubiak too, Clint, because I think if I remember correctly, had some time in San Francisco. Obviously, in San Francisco, they know a little bit about in regards to exposing Dallas as they have in the off season, and I'm sure he probably went back to and regarding recent history. I mean, I don't mean bring it up, but like the playoffs too last year, in regards to we saw like basically I've seen if a team can be balanced, but especially get the run game going against Dallas, it compromises kind of your defense because, like you mentioned, it puts you in a tough spot in regards to addressing more things. And a good team like New Orleans, this offense has showed obviously on Sunday that they can just kind of have their way, for lack of a better part. So I'm with you. I think for me, in my opinion, if I had to put the theoretical blame on one side of the ball, it would be the defense, because for the most part in the first half, the offense held stride. Like, I know they weren't getting touchdowns like the Saints were every drive. Once again, that's on the defense. They
scored 16 in the first half, though, so like they were doing their thing.
And granted, at one point it's 28-13, but Dallas had scored every time they touched the ball. And then, yes, unfortunately, like you mentioned, Dak has that unfortunate pick that, kind of that was it. Because then the Saints obviously have the easy field to make it 35-13. And then, Dallas made 35-16. But then come out second half, like you mentioned, Dallas had to force the issue from there on out. And it's not easy being one-dimensional in the NFL. So, I think this is just more of, it's an impressive win by the Saints, too. I think we have to give credit to their O-line. It's something that I was very skeptical of. But once again, it seems like with Kubiak, and he's also seemed to have gone in Derek Carr's head, because Derek Carr, I mentioned it last week, and, granted, like we mentioned the caveat, okay, it was against the Panthers. Saw against this week's, Dallas obviously has talent. Still, letting it rip, like you mentioned with the Shaheed touchdown, and just, overall, I mean, 11 for 16. I know he threw the one pick, but man, like, especially for 243, that means he's almost throwing for 20, if my math's correct, like 20 yards per throw. And obviously, so that's a little bit inflated, but nonetheless, like you mentioned, I mean, great game by the Saints, and yeah, we may have to start taking them seriously from here on out, as long as they can stay healthy and such. Because like we mentioned, they got good pieces on both sides of the ball. It's just a matter of putting it all together, and they have done so. So, yeah, we'll see if they can keep building off that. Oh, one other thing I will say about Dallas, though, it wasn't a huge concern, but yeah, like maybe, and I think this is a big topic across the league. I'll continue to mention this as we go on, but running the ball, not a great run game going right now. But once again, like we mentioned, y'all are behind the 8 ball pretty quick, so I can understand why maybe you weren't as patient with the run game because, yeah, like you mentioned, you're down double-digit points and kind of force your hand at that point. And the Saints have a solid run defense. So,
yeah. And I will say, too, on some of these things, number one, I think they should get Rico Dowdle more involved. I don't like the fact that they're continuing to split the workload. I wish that it would be more of like a 60-40, 65-35 with Rico at this point because, I love Zeke, but he should be the grinded out guy, the short yardage guy. I feel like it should be a lot more situational as opposed to just like trading drives. And I don't know why we're getting Deuce Vaughn out there. Like, no offense to Deuce Vaughn, but like he had 2.8 yards per carry. I don't understand that. I feel like we should just get Rico in there because even in terms of the receptions, he had 4 catches for 29 yards of his 5 targets. He had 7 carries for 30 yards. These aren't like crazy like stats, but it's better than the other 2 running backs when it came to both receiving and running the ball. So it's like, why aren't we getting him more touches? That's just how I feel. He definitely looks the most explosive out of all the running backs. And also, on the thing you said about getting the run game going against the Cowboys defense, the big thing with the Cowboys defense is like the thing you don't want to do is what Cleveland allowed, which is where Dallas is able to get you in 3rd and long because that allows Micah Parsons to Marcus Lawrence. Like the defensive line, the edge rushers has been the strength of this defense for a long time. That allows them to do what they want to do. And when you get that run game going and it's always 3rd and short, which is what the Saints did, like it always felt like it was 3rd and 2. Every time it was 3rd down, if it got to 3rd down, it was 3rd and 2, which meant they could still run the ball. And that's the thing that Dallas they can't allow to happen. They have to get you in 3rd and longs because that's when the strength of the defense is able to come through. And even unfortunately for the Cowboys, just like the last 2 years, like Diggs is injured last year. Now Bland is injured this year. Like they just haven't had their full secondary to be out there. So it's just kind of the reality the Cowboys live in. And it's definitely something to look towards in the future is can they figure out how to stop the run? Because very clearly when teams are able to run the ball on them, that's when the defense is not as good as they can be. So yeah. Also, Clint Kubiak, I'm convinced is going to be a head coach next year.
Yeah. Only last thing before we can move on, I just want to reinforce your point. You mentioned the 3rd and shorts. Yeah, like all I'm seeing are 3rd and 2s and 3rd. The only time it wasn't that was 3rd and 9, and this was when it was 41 or 35-19. They're about to score.
Yeah.
But then that was regardless they drew a DPI.
Yeah.
So then that was first down. Then Kamara scored. So yeah. Staying ahead of the chains. It's like one of those things where, yeah, it sounds easy in concept, but yeah, just being efficient doing that. Yeah, Saints overall 5 of 8 on 3rd down. So and like you said, for the most part too, there are times where they didn't even get to 3rd down. It was like first down run, and then 2nd down run and or pass play, and boom, they have another first down, new set of downs. So, we'll be interested to see going forward if Dallas can correct that. Once again, that's probably more an issue against some of the certain teams, just because that's how the landscape is shaped. But we'll see how about these NFC teams go moving forward. Keeping it in the NFC, though, let's move on down to Detroit, where the Lions got upset. Well, not really upset because they had some close matches last year. And some would say the Bucs are due because the Bucs won 20-16 in Detroit. A little Baker revenge game. Not in regards against the Lions, but obviously like I said, they lost last year, and he had some pretty good highlights. Had that 11-yard run and such. But yeah, John, what were your thoughts here in regards to the Bucs beating the Lions on the road?
Yeah, I mean the Bucs looked real good. I think the big difference here between the two teams was the Bucs. They played complementary football, where the Lions unfortunately weren't really able to. They were trailing for a good amount of the game, and that didn't allow them to really play into the strength. But they just want to sit there and run the ball. Now they did have success on the ground, but the issue is that on the other side, Tampa was able to get really big explosive plays. Like Chris Godwin had that 41-yard touchdown on that drive. I think he had like 60 yards on that single drive alone. And then also, Jared Goff, those the 2 interceptions. Just all these different kind of things Sure, Tampa did fumble a couple times, but they also recovered the fumbles, so they weren't turning it over. Now, Baker did have the one interception, but it wasn't as big of a deal because I don't believe Detroit was able to score off of it because I believe it went to halftime. So, yeah, Baker threw the interception. It was right before the end of half, and Detroit wasn't able to do anything with it. So, ultimately, yeah, I thought Tampa looked real good. They are 2-0. It's going to be an interesting division race between them and the Saints because I think even with Tampa, I don't think we've really seen the full breadth of their offense. We haven't really seen the run game get going yet. We haven't seen that game where both Chris Godwin and Mike Evans kind of go crazy together, which is definitely possible. Cade Otton really hasn't been much of a factor in the offense yet, even though we know he can be. So I feel like even Tampa has a lot to improve upon. And for Detroit, I really felt like they were close in this one. Like statistically, it felt like when you just look at it, they should have won the game. But once again, it just kind of came down to they'd have these long drives. It would result in turnovers. They were settling for field goals. And meanwhile, for Tampa, they were able to get these big explosive plays where like they weren't able to sustain drives, right? Like I think the longest drive they had was only 6-7 plays around there. So it wasn't like long drives that they were able to have. So Detroit's burning clock. They're running 13, 14 play drives, completely ruining, the clock management. Meanwhile, Tampa, they're scoring in 3 minutes and then just playing defense. So yeah, I thought it was a good game for Tampa, and I think if that's how they want to play football, it's a little risky because I don't know how long they can sustain the explosive plays, but they certainly have the players to do so.
Yeah. Only thing I want to add is I mentioned this. I love Dan Campbell, love his aggressiveness. Sometimes take the points, take the aggressive. Because you mentioned there were times where they should have settled for field goals. Later in the game, I know there was 1 minute left. They're at the Tampa 11. I understand, but it's 4th and 8, and like I don't know, at that point, they take the field goal. It becomes 2019. I know you're only down 1, but they did get the ball back. They had their time. They had the timeouts to do so. They had all 3, and they didn't have to use all 3, but they used 2 of them because then the Bucs threw on third down. So yeah, and then they even drove down right back into Tampa Bay territory for that last drive. Obviously, did work out. But once again, they're at the Tampa Bay 26. So obviously, in theory, they may have had a chance to win this game if they had just taken their points at times, especially in that moment where it's 4th and 8 that the Tampa is just tough. Like I said, it was tough to get any big plays going, and that's just my only personal criticism on top of what you said. And yeah, we'll have to see too how Jared Goff responds because I think it's just games like these are reasons why we kind of question Goff because it's shown. You get him a little uncomfortable. You get some pressure around him, which what the Bucs did. He starts throwing a couple of ducks. Didn't help that he opened the game with the interception, of course. But we did see a couple times some. I hate to like make it a staple, but we saw a couple of Jared Goff ducks. I'm sure you were like, man, there were a couple throws open when they were, and he like I said, just chucked it at the ground. Not meaning to, but yeah. So, be interesting to see. Obviously, these two teams meet again, very similar stylistically in regards to the fact that they've built in the trenches and, kind of old school type head coaches there as well with Bowles and Campbell. But Bowles and the Bucs and Baker and the gang, they get the win, as mentioned, despite also, too, on the last note, Aiden Hutchinson getting 4.5 sacks, mostly in the first half as well. That was crazy. And I think he's on a crazy pace right now. An unrealistic pace, but who knows? We'll see how he goes. So anyhow, that's the Bucs getting the win over the Lions. Let's go on over to another game that was very heavily in the trenches. It was my Green Bay Packers winning the home opener. I did not know this. Apparently we've won our home opener for like 12 straight years. So I should have known that, I guess, because they get the win over the I'm blanking on the Colts. I'm trying to find the score on ESPN. Thank you. Yes, you're useless ESPN. Sorry. It was 16-10. I just want to make sure. But obviously a very run-heavy game by the Packers. And the Colts even had some success too, but turnovers kind of seem to be the issue. What were your thoughts here in regards to this one?
The game went exactly as I thought it would. Run the ball. The Colts' run defense is atrocious. Clearly couldn't stop it. Josh Jacobs was able to have himself a day. And on the other side, as long as they can make Anthony Richardson uncomfortable, then that should win the game. Jonathan Taylor, 12 carries, 103 yards, averaging almost 9 yards a carry, and yet the Colts somehow lose a tight one. I don't know why they didn't continue to feed Jonathan Taylor, because I'm going to be real. So far out of what I've seen of Anthony Richardson, I know he's got a lot of promise, but throwing it 34 times, I don't think he's the kind of guy that you want to be doing that with. It's his completion percentage is still looking like the same as back when he was in college, which is about 50% of his passes back-to-back weeks. He's not that efficient. He's not that accurate. And this week he threw 3 interceptions because he's trying to make plays happen. And I get it, but when it's a close game, the Packers only won 16-10. I know that the lead was a little bit bigger earlier because at halftime it was 10-0. But once again, that's still close enough that you keep relying on the run game. Josh Jacobs had 32 carries for 151 yards. Jonathan Taylor had 20 less carries and only 50 less yards. Like, feed Jonathan Taylor the ball. I don't understand why the Colts did what they did, and this is just not a winning recipe moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, a couple of them were bad. Double coverage or just not the appropriate throw by Richardson. And it was a game too where the Packers probably should have dominated more. I mean, there's that moment I think in the first half where Josh Jacobs really fumbles at the goal line. So I mean, could have looked worse, and the fact that the Colts still hung around in a sense and still had chances, that's obviously doesn't help. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be tougher too. You mentioned how kind of poor their defense is, especially their run defense. The Colts losing to Forrest Buckner for at least 4 weeks. They put him on IR, so that's going to be tough going forward for them. And yeah, only other thing I want to add. Don't mean to glaze my team, but just want to say, I think we got more love to Matt LaFleur. I mean, Malik Willis, a guy that we just saw, we talk about raw. He was extremely raw in Tennessee. And I know it wasn't eye-popping. He was only 12 for 14, 122, but made good decisions, made good throws. Like that was literally the difference of this game, was him, being a little more managed. And it helps that, yes, he just turned around and handed the ball to Josh Jacobs 32 times in company. But, yeah, I mean, good game plan by them because they still did enough passing wise to get this offense going and give Malik some confidence, especially on that one. I'm not sure if you saw that where apparently our center threw up on the ball. Malik was supposed to throw it, and Malik just obviously had to make the decision to run with it, which kudos to him because I don't know if I would even run with it. I thought I would be more inclined to throw the ball, but obviously it was a critical moment and don't want to stop the clock. So yeah, good on them. We'll see if the Packers can kind of keep trucking along and figure it out and just survive in advance, like I say, going forward without Jordan Love. And yeah, Colts, tough start to the Anthony Richardson season thus far, but seen some encouraging things, seen some negative things. We'll see if they can keep progressing forward. But keeping it in the AFC, let's go on over to the Jets as they get their first win, technically, with Rodgers as a full-time participant of the game, because they did technically win that, that initial game last year. But nonetheless, they beat the Titans here, 24-17. Kind of good overall team effort. But what were your thoughts here in regards to the Jets getting a big win?
I mean, it was a good one. That said, the Titans, not a great team as we've seen this year, so I'm not going to put too much stock into it. I definitely felt like the Jets should have won by more. I mean, they got the touchdown win, but similar to what I thought about the Colts, I felt like they should have gave Breece Hall a lot more carries. I know that Braylon Allen got involved here, and he actually looked pretty good, so I like that. But I'm still worried about the passing game. You only came out with 176 total yards. Garrett Wilson only 4 for 57, and outside of that, so you had 18 completions, right? And Breece Hall got 7 of those. Garrett Wilson got 4 of those. We need some other people to step up because not every team's going to be like Tennessee and lose the game, despite the fact that you're basically a two-man show. Now, once again, Braylon Allen, he got involved. That was nice to see. He did get 2 touchdowns, 1 receiving, 1 rushing, but we need to see more Mike Williams. We need to see more Allen Lazard. I'd like to see the tight ends become a factor at any point. I don't know, because it feels like even though the Jets are able to come out here, they still have some kinks to work out on offense because, when you play better teams like we saw against San Francisco, force-feeding your 2 playmakers, it can work, but it's probably not going to win you a lot of football games.
Yeah, only thing I want to add is, and this is going to be growing pains, obviously, it wasn't great last week, and he had obviously some viral moments this week, but yeah, Will Levis, ball security, they're already kind of dubbing him the next Carson Wentz, which ain't great. Just need less Tropic Thunder moments because, I mean, there's that fumble, which I'm sure you saw and the others saw. Like, they're in the red zone. They're up 7-0. Like, sometimes we'll just live to fight another day, buddy. Take the sack. Throw the ball away. Out of bounds at least. Don't underhand it like you did the previous week 1. And then obviously, like, they... so even despite that, because they didn't technically score off the fumble, but he throws a pick on the first play of the next drive. And then, then the Jets capitalize, get a touchdown. And then from there... another thing, too, I believe this is the second straight week they've had a block punt. So that's special teams, maybe something they got to look at. So, yeah, but I'm not going to sit here and harp on them too much. We know it's a new regime, new head coach in there, obviously new quarterback in terms of being their guy. So there's a lot of turnover, a lot of growing pains for them at the moment. And, yeah, Jets keep handling their business. Like, it will be interesting to see. I am a Breece Hall owner, but, Braylon Allen, I think, is a good little 1-2 punch with Breece. Especially if they don't get, like you mentioned, more weapons involved in the passing game. Maybe Braylon Allen, they can just be a really strong running game and then let Rodgers kind of pick and choose in regards to his moments with Garrett Wilson, and hopefully Mike Williams, too, can get going more as the season goes on. But, yeah, tight ends would be good for them to get involved as well. But big win by the Jets. Let's move on back to the NFC. This was one of the shockers of the day for some, especially for you, unfortunately, as you put 500 on this one. I didn't mention, too, unfortunately for Dallas, you put big money on them as well. But the Niners, they go into Minnesota, and the Vikings may just have their number because for the second time in 2 years, the Vikings beat the San Francisco 49ers, this time 23-17, this time with Sam Darnold at the helm. So what were your thoughts here in regards to this big win for Minnesota?
The Niners just shot themselves in the foot too many times. Realistically, like, they had a good game here. Like, Debo did good, Kittle did good. Jordan Mason had a great game on the ground, but they allowed that 97-yard touchdown to Justin Jefferson. Otherwise, Jefferson didn't really have much of an impact. He had like 3 catches for 40 yards outside of that one play, which was the 97-yard touchdown. And then even on the ground game, like, Ty Chandler had a decent performance, but it wasn't like killer. So I don't know. It felt like the Niners should have won this game, but they shot themselves in the foot. Brock Purdy threw an interception. He also lost a fumble. They fumbled a couple other times, but they were recovering their own fumbles. It just didn't look clean from San Francisco, and they weren't really able to take advantage of Minnesota whenever they were making mistakes because, Minnesota, they had the interception, and sure, San Francisco was able to get the touchdown on it, but then immediately after, Minnesota gets the field goal, and then in the second half, we have the same thing where it gets flipped, where Brock Purdy throws the interception, and Minnesota scores a touchdown off of it. So it's like, I don't know. It felt like San Francisco should have just been a lot cleaner in this game. But in the second half, when things were tight, they just kept shooting themselves in the foot. I mean, literally, they threw the interception. Minnesota scores the touchdown on one play. Then they fumble the next drive. It's like, come on, guys, what are we doing? So I don't know. I don't know if it's a Minnesota thing. I will say I saw a stat that was kind of shocking that I believe the Niners have not won a game in Minnesota since like the 80s.
Yeah, I see that. I saw that too. So
that's crazy. So maybe if I knew that, I would have gone with a superstition here because I was not aware of that. And just quite frankly, on paper, I think this is somewhat of an embarrassing loss for San Francisco.
Did you? And I'm have to tell all those out there. Did you see the Brock Purdy, his quote to Flores after the game about like, man, your scheme is crazy?
I did. But once again, Brock, you got Kyle Shanahan. You guys should be able to figure it out. I don't know.
I don't know. I think this is one, too, where I think I'm going to give more kudos to the Vikings here on both sides of the ball. I mean, I mentioned it in our...
They look great. I will say, great. They're 2-0.
Yeah, they're 2-0. That's all you can ask for. And once again, so to start, too, caveat, it could have been worse because they did fumble also when they, at one time, at the one. Like, it was literally Aaron Jones running it in. Fred Warner saves the day and punches it out, and they recovered at the one. And they did score a touchdown and keep them in that game. Otherwise, it would have been 27-7. Good night, basically, because, I mean... They're not. Niners aren't really built as a team to come back from behind, especially in their current state. In regards to the Vikings offense, we've seen this offense be able to move the ball, and then we saw it. Like I mentioned in my breakdown, or in our breakdown last year when they played on Monday night, they know how to find explosive plays against this Seattle scheme type defense, 4-3. But then, like we've seen too. especially under Brian Flores, and let's go back to a little bit last year. Just he does a lot of creative things, and yeah, I mean, it's probably one of the reasons why Brock would never really got settled in, and they had all these turnovers, and even then too, Brock got sacked 6 times like this as well. So yeah, they were definitely stressing their protections, making life tough on Purdy. Like kudos to kudos to the coaching staff, because yeah, it's annoying. I feel like the Vikings are going to be one of those annoying teams. We know that they don't have. There's a criticism of ours, like not a lot of talent on defense, and some of it aging, and there's a lot of unknowns. But yeah, Brian Flores getting the most out of those guys, and I mean, yeah, giving San Francisco headaches is not an easy thing to do, and that's what they did. With a lot of their disguises and just different looks that they showed. A lot of crowding line of scrimmage. Who's gonna some of these guys are gonna drop, but some of them are gonna rush. You don't know who, and they all could come too, because sometimes Flores is crazy like that. And he'll do an orthodox, send 7 or 8 kind of a zero blitz, but know their tendencies as well. I think that was a big thing too, was they were felt like the Vikings had a good understanding of protecting the middle of the field, because that's typically where the Niners like to throw the ball as well. So yeah, be interesting to see if the Vikings can keep this momentum going forward, as they, like you mentioned, 2-0, exceeding all of our expectations that we all had for them. As yeah, tough loss for the Niners, and it gets worse. Debo, he's supposed to miss some time as well, so things are only going to get tougher for them going forward. But anyhow, let's go on to a tough game, probably a tough game to watch in theory, because 2 very kind of ugly defensive teams, although that has been the theme this year, as I'm sure you've seen offenses down generally in regards to the trends, touchdowns wise and such from previous years. But nonetheless, the Seahawks took overtime, but they go to Foxborough and beat the Patriots 23-20, and as without Kenneth Walker. It was a great day for Geno through the air, of course, which is a little surprising, but I mean, considering the result, I guess not too much. But anyhow, John, what were your thoughts here in regards to the Seahawks squeaking one out against the Patriots?
Yeah, I won't lie. Back-to-back weeks in which I felt like Seattle played very inferior opponents and didn't look that strong. But at the end of the day, they got the wins, which is all that really matters in the NFL. There's no style points like there might be in college because of how you get into the playoffs and all that stuff based on voting. So yeah, the one concerning part for Seattle for me was that, number one, Hunter Henry ate them alive. So I don't know if this is going to be, which, they played Denver previously and it was a rookie quarterback. And so, the Bo Nix thing, like it wasn't really able to do much, against that defense. But could we see some teams with more veteran presences like Jacoby Brissett, like Hunter Henry, start to take advantage of that secondary, specifically over the middle? And also, Antonio Gibson and Ramondre Stevenson were able to eat on the ground. They had 185 total rushing yards. They got that rushing touchdown. So the Seattle run defense after a strong week against Denver, but once again, Denver's run game has been awful and far inferior. Is that something to look out for? Also, no Kenneth Walker. Zach Charbonnet filled in solidly, but the Seattle run game was piss poor. They had 46 total rushing yards on 19 attempts, so they were not able to move it. But luckily for them, DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith and Jigba absolutely dominated on the offensive side of the ball. Both had over 10 catches. Both had over 100 yards. So they looked really strong. We love to see that Jackson Smith and Jigba is finally getting utilized. He had 16 targets in this game, and that is something I love to see. And I don't know if you saw the passing chart. We used to look at the DeAndre Hopkins one, but the passing chart for Geno Smith in this game, he was throwing it everywhere, all over the field. So the coaching regime, the change that has happened, very different approach, it seems, this week than we've probably ever seen when it comes to Seattle in the last, 15 years, where they were throwing it everywhere, underneath, both sides of the ball, both sides of the field, over the top, over the middle, all along the sideline. It was a thing of beauty to see. So I'm not taking too much stock away from Seattle, considering they played Denver and New England, who, both of us projected to be teams that are not fighting for the playoffs whatsoever. So I'm not going to take too much away from it, but I will say some encouraging things out of Seattle and a couple red flags.
Yeah, I mean, I will say the defense got stopped when they needed to, because the Patriots got the ball first in overtime. And obviously, like we mentioned, still a restructured defense under Mike McDonald, and I'm sure it may take some time to iron out the pieces and the talent they have there on that side of the ball. not too shocking though that the Patriots made this ugly because it feels like this is what they're going to be, and they're going to be a run heavy team, which they had success running the ball last week too. We saw, so maybe that this could be the keys to them. Obviously, they've got one win, but getting a couple more as well, and then just managing the passing game. Jacoby Brissett once again didn't put the ball in harm's way, didn't let throw a dumb interception or take a risk that flipped the game on its head and gave Seattle momentum because they had plenty of opportunities with that. Like you mentioned, DK kind of ate them alive, especially on that big touchdown. So just even though it was a loss, good stuff from the Patriots, and they've shown that they're at least can be feisty and competitive. They got a good defense, so I'm interested to see how they are going forward. And Seattle love to see that Jackson Smith-Njigba being fully utilized and targeted, and as well as DK too. Just something that, like you said, just wasn't really their style under Pete Carroll. There's a lot of Pete Carroll. We're going to run the ball and play good defense and be extremely simple on offense and simplistic in their schemes. Well, it seems like you said, new ideas are coming in and they're starting to come to fruition. So it'll be interesting to see Seattle continue to grow with that and see how much further they can be and how great they could possibly be. But obviously, got to see them against quote unquote more elite competition going forward. But like you said, you just got to win. That's all you got to do is survive in advance, win, and go on to next week. So they will do that and take the win on the road there. Now we go to your division. This was definitely this game kind of lived up to the expected reputation of most people as the Commanders beat the Washington Commanders beat the New York Giants in a kind of a snooze fest. It was 21-18 here. Giants obviously didn't have their kicker. I think I saw this was the first game where a team scored 3 touchdowns and lost or something of that sort. But nonetheless, what were your thoughts here in regards to your two rivals clashing?
Yeah, I thought this was going to be an ugly game, and I thought that Washington is just going to be the better team with the Giants. They're not good. They're not good. Now, they did have some encouraging things offensively. Devin Singletary was able to get going. That said, he did lose a fumble, so that's unfortunate. But he had a solid game on the ground, and Malik Neighbors had a coming out party. I mean, he looked great week 1 anyway, but they force-fed him the ball like crazy, and he was able to make the most of it. That said, he was targeted 18 times and only caught 10, and nobody else really made an impact whatsoever. Darius Slayton, 3 catches for 33. Wan'Dale Robinson did get a touchdown, but on 2 catches for 18. And as I said about the Jets, there's just no shot you're going to win a lot of football games if it's just Malik Neighbors. So I don't know. The Giants, they're bad. They're bad. And Malik Neighbors seems to be the only thing that really looks great on the offense. And for Washington, although it wasn't pretty on their end by any means, they played good, sound, complimentary football. Brian Robinson had a great game on the ground. Jaden Daniels didn't have a lot of huge plays, but he didn't cost his team, didn't fumble, didn't throw any interceptions, no turnovers, which was big in a tight game because if he did, who knows? Maybe they're coming out with a loss here. So you just trust your defense and you trust your special teams, and they were able to come out and get the dub because of it. So yeah, I think that for Washington, this is the kind of games they need to play. The concerning part is that, once again, even though they were able to get the win, defensively, we're kind of eaten alive by Singletary and Neighbors.
Yeah, like you mentioned, honestly, and I know you're really pretty harsh on the Giants, and rightfully so. I mean, if they have a field goal kicker, and I know it's just unfortunate that happens, they might win. They probably win this game because they were in field goal range on their last drive, and it was tied 18. Had to go for it on 4th and 4, and they were, like I said, at the Washington 22. And even then, they should have had that play. Neighbors it was just a bad drop on a great day that he had. Unfortunately, who knows what happens if he catches that, and maybe they do win outright. So obviously, that sucks. But yeah, it's not too shocked in regards to the Giants. Kind of falling on their face here, finding a way to lose this game. Only thing I want to add is, man, Washington. Also, by the way, didn't score any touchdowns. All 21 points were from field goals. Man, Cliff Kingsbury comes back and all he does is irk me because at one point, I don't know if I put this in our group chat, but I don't know how Terry McLaurin's not getting more involved, getting more usage. And once again, it's probably I haven't looked at the passing charts because honestly, I'm scared to because I'm gonna get upset. Go ahead.
I will say they did target him the most, but a lot of that was just screens. I
Yes.
think like at least 4 or 5 of them were just screen passes, which is why he finished the day with 6 catches for 22 yards. So they were giving him the ball. It was just plays that have a potential to go nowhere.
Let me tell you something. Also, I was watching because this is on Red Zone. Red Zone side screen, another game on the main screen. Saw at one point, McLaurin, he had 4 catches for 8 yards.
Yeah.
And so, by the way, his final stat line, 6 for 22. We're doing the math here. His longest reception was 12 yards. So basically, the other 5 catches were for 10 yards. And that's what you're doing with your best receiver. I don't understand it. You get the win, whatever. So one critique
on
is,
that too. I don't know if you would agree with this. I don't think Terry McLaurin's the kind of receiver like an Odell Beckham or a CeeDee Lamb where it's like you just give him the ball and let him try to work after the catch. Like he's never struck me as that kind of guy. If I'm doing that for anybody in this offense, it's probably Diami Brown if I'm going to throw a bunch of screens to a guy, you know?
Regardless, like your best, you think you'd find better ways to get the ball to your best receiver, and then also I want to criticize the red zone defense or offense because at times it was just poor. Like you mentioned, Ryan Robinson kind of ran all over them, and yet you only get field goals. So that's going to be a concern going forward, obviously for the Commanders, because you're not going to win. You're not going to win every game just kicking 3 every time down there. Of course, I know that's like a cliche, but they got away with it this game. They will not get away with it another game if that happens. Unless, of course, their defense goes absolutely crazy. But like we just mentioned, they won't because the defense has issues as well. So, good win for the Commanders. You win. I got a home game against a rival, ugly, and like you mentioned, Jane Daniels was efficient. I'm not going to criticize him really because he doesn't really. Once again, he doesn't make the play calls. He just executes them. So, I'm watching you, Cliff. That's all I got to say. And honestly, though, I don't have any faith.
Listen,
the league I had Terry McLaurin in, he's benched. Done. Like, I'm sorry, Terry.
This is
I gotta see
classic Cliff Kingsbury, though, because he did this with the Cardinals, too. Oh, what a coincidence. Zach Ertz leads the team in receiving
He's
game.
the big play threat. The plays are drawn up for Zach Ertz.
And Noah Brown and Austin Eckler, like, they're throwing stuff on the inside and dump-offs, and, like, it's just a lot of cute stuff, and it's just a whole lot of nothing. Like, they got the win. Well, the Cardinals made the playoffs one time with Cliff, and that doesn't mean he's a good coach, so...
Yeah, and they had pretty good talent then. Anyway, nonetheless, Commanders get the big win. Kudos for y'all. Survive in advance, or move on. We'll move on from that. We'll see if the Giants can bounce back because they really need it. That was like a win where they should have, like we said, should have had that one. They did. Fell through their fingers. Anyway, let's talk about a team that did not let an opportunity slip through their fingers as the Chargers, and this one will be probably pretty short. Chargers put the beat down on the Panthers, 26-3. Quentin Johnson may be back. He had to look pretty solid, had 2 touchdowns here. Obviously the bigger news for the Panthers as of right now as we're recording, Bryce Young benched after this. But first, regards to the game, if you had any thoughts, what were they?
Listen, I know that a lot of people on this whole Bryce Young thing are throwing a lot of things a lot of different ways. All I'm going to say is currently through 2 games, the Panthers have a top 5 offensive line when it comes to pass blocking based on the stats. This is not based on me. This is based on like pass rush win rate and all that kind of stuff. So all the people who are blaming the offensive line, it's not their fault. And in terms of receivers getting open, I know everybody's throwing around that one clip of Adam Thielen open downfield, but like Deontay Johnson and Adam Thielen have made careers off of getting open. So it's like, Jonathan Mingo and Xavier Legette and whatever the young guys, like we don't even talk about them, but like those 2 veterans have made a career off of getting open. So I just find it hard to believe that the Panthers are so bad that they can't make anything work, because once again, I've held true that if you are an elite quarterback, you will overcome whatever situation you are in. Remember when Joe Burrow went to Cincinnati? The offensive line was putrid. The receiving core was basically the corpse of A.J. Brown and then like Tyler Boyd and a rookie T. Higgins who hasn't proven anything. All of a sudden, they start killing it, and they look good before he gets injured. Look at C.J. Stroud. The Houston Texans receiving core is supposed to be absolutely terrible. Sure, they've got an okay offensive line, but it was largely just their left tackle. They were fantastic. Like, look at every rookie quarterback. Justin Herbert with the Chargers, terrible offensive line. He made it work. Like, if you've got bad situations around you, typically, I cannot remember a quarterback in my entire life outside of like Ryan Tannehill. And honestly, I think he was just boosted by the scheme largely by the end of his career when he did pop off. But I can't remember a single quarterback that was absolutely ruined by their team that drafted them and then went on to become elite somewhere else. So either you got it or you don't. And once again, even Ryan Tannehill, he put up elite numbers, but I don't think anybody would have considered him elite during that stretch. You had Derrick Henry rushing for 2,000 yards. So anyway, I say all that to say I still don't agree with the Bryce Young benching. I don't think that this is a good enough team that like Andy Dalton's going to come in and change the trajectory. I feel like you keep running out there with Bryce Young through the whole year. You let him get his 2 years of starting, and then you reevaluate after that, because I don't believe that any quarterback deserves only a year and basically 2 games, because even though I just said all the stuff I said about the team, you still got to, argue the fact that Bryce Young has not had like the perfect surroundings, right? So he's still trying to learn football with some issues. So I think he should be able to stay out there and keep playing. But I do think that, simply put, he's probably not going to be an elite quarterback, and I don't know if this is fixable in terms of what I'm seeing out of him, because he just doesn't read the field well. There are times where receivers are open. There are times when the pocket is clean and he's not reading the field well. So, yeah, I think he should be starting, but at the same time, I've pretty much made up my mind on Bryce Young by this point, and I don't think that long term he's going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. So,
I'm not particularly. I'm a little bit on the maybe opposite side of the fence in regards to, like, I'm not particularly giving up on him yet. I think what's important about some of those other situations you mentioned too was, and I think it's important, and I'll mention this here, like, they at least were building for a while, especially before they got them too. With Bryce and like with the Panthers, we saw like they literally gave up their best receiver and future capital that really came back to bite them in the face there. And now, granted, they've tried to address that this offseason. I'm not sure if it was the perfect way to do it, but they tried. They brought on the 2 guards. I will say in regards to Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen, Adam Thielen's definitely at the back 9 of his career, and he was solid.
Sure,
but I'll say like Deontay Johnson as well. Like, he was already on the outs from Pittsburgh. Like last year, they're like they tried last year, it didn't really work out, and then I'm sure they're obviously willing to let him walk, and then Carolina.
Yeah,
who needed
I'm not saying it's perfect, but I am saying that it's doable. Like, if you put C.J. Stroud in this offense, he would be doing better than Bryce Young is right now.
Yeah, and I think that's without a doubt. But in regards to what I'm saying, though, I just feel like for Bryce, this may just not be the right situation. He may need, and maybe to kind of counter your point too, Geno Smith, he had to leave New York. New York was just bad.
Yeah, but he's not elite. Like,
I'm not saying he's elite, but in regards
to,
and I will agree that we both said Bryce Young may not ever be elite. Let me just say that, right? And I do agree. Like, I don't think he's gonna be elite either. Could be a starting quarterback, and we'll see if he gets a different situation, because he is a solid thrower of the ball. Size is a concern. And I will say that it's very concerning. I'm sure you saw the sack where like he got on the outside and it seemed like he's trying to point a guy, and I guess he thought he had more time, and he just got smoked. Like and it's like, I was like, he should have just thrown that away. So I don't know. Maybe this benching is more to, hey, like, see what Andy does. Get rid of the ball here, but be aggressive here. Because I will, like, and not that it's the exact same situation, but Tua kind of went through this with the Fitzpatrick ordeal in regards to they would pull him in and out and such. So it'll be interesting to see just how they handle this going forward. But to be fair, like, I'm trying to get to the point too. It's not like Carolina's been a great organization the past couple of years. Sure. Like we mentioned, there's been times where they should have sold. They should have just leaned into the rebuild. It took them way too long to trade. Brian Burns. Remember, they apparently could have gotten first round offers. They only sold him for a third round. They only traded him for a third round pick because they waited too long.
2 first rounders. That was from the Rams.
Yeah, and so there's that. Obviously, it sucks you lose Dwayne Brown, but like even like a guy like some solid piece like Shaq Thompson, like they've been holding on to him for a while. I'm sure they could have maybe pawned him off to another team because he's always been a solid linebacker. But obviously now it's a little too late. And then even like letting DJ Moore walk right after they gave him an extension, not walk, but involving him in that trade, like. Yeah, just a little bit of poor decision making. And it even goes, I'm really trying to attack the front office, I will say here. I'll have David Tepper, this is a little bit on you too, because we've seen this functionality there too. It kind of breeds from the top down in regards to that, because he's gone through multiple head coaches. I know Frank Reich maybe wasn't the right answer, but man, that went away quick. Yeah, we saw how it soured with your guy, Matt Rule, very quickly. Now, granted, that was a little bit different because Rule had a couple of years prior, so I understand. But just kind of been a mess all around. And that's why like I'm a little bit lenient. I'm being a little bit lenient towards Bryce and a little more hopeful, I guess, going forward. But yeah, and once again, we're both don't want to pat ourselves in the back on another man's downfall. But we both had CJ Stroud above him for many of the reasons that everyone is seeing right now, which is the size, maybe not great arm strength. Hey, playing at Alabama, you see when he does have a system around him, he could look good. But obviously, you're not always going to have a perfect situation in the NFL, like you mentioned. Sometimes you gotta make chicken salad out of chicken nonsense. So
yeah. Just final point on that too. On the Alabama thing, I don't love the argument when because people use this against CJ Stroud when they say, "Oh, Ohio State's never produced a good quarterback." But I will say, how many of these Bama quarterbacks have we seen where they don't have an elite arm, they don't really have elite mobility, they're oftentimes undersized, and they keep coming out and they keep getting drafted early, and none of them are really panning out? Like Tua is the best of that bunch, but it's like, what recent Bama quarterback during that Saban era? Because Saban was very clearly recruiting a very specific type of quarterback, which is people that can be good within the system and will, do what they're supposed to do. They handle their business. But like Mac Jones, Tua, the Jalen Hurts is actually probably the best of them, and he left. He transferred out and went to Oklahoma because they didn't want him. So I don't know. And even with Jalen Hurts, like he has some of the same issues that some of them have, where it's like, sure, he's good at protecting the ball sometimes, but also he's got very clear weaknesses when it comes to like the middle of the field and, reading coverages and certain stuff like that. So, not to bash on Jalen Hurts, but my point is like, how many of these Bama quarterbacks that are very, they have the same weaknesses, they have the same strengths, and yet for some reason they just kept getting drafted highly overall when they don't really have that X factor outside of the fact that, like, sure, in college, the game tape, because I've already seen people say this. I saw a YouTube short that popped up on my feed where a guy was saying he was blaming everything about the Panthers and saying, just put on Bryce Young's game tape. The difference is that Bryce Young's game tape is the equivalent of playing on, like, the prime 49ers of, like, the last few years against the Carolina Panthers. Like, that's a majority of what Alabama is playing against. There are very few games in college football where Alabama is playing against even competition. Now, they did have those games, but very few of those games. And so obviously the tape is going to look real good. It's going to look real good when you have all the best players on your side of the ball. And you're playing with Heisman receivers, and you're playing with a bunch of first-round offensive linemen and first-round running backs and first-round everybody, right? Like, obviously, everybody's going to look good in that scenario. It just comes down to when you get to the next level, can you actually prove that you were the reason why everybody looks so good? And for the quarterbacks, for Alabama, they just haven't really proven that. And it's a tough position. It's tough, but like I said, and I pulled up the stats here. When it comes to pass blocking grades from PFF, if people disagree with PFF, that's whatever. But just from PFF, in terms of the top 50 offensive linemen through 2 weeks so far, the Panthers have 4 of their 5 starters in that top 50 in pass block grade. One of their guards is top 7. So, like, in terms of pass blocking, they're looking real good. And yet, people are going to blame the offensive line. Once again, I know the receiver core is not the greatest, but it's serviceable. It's doable to throw for more than 80 yards and a couple picks. Like, we should be doing better than that. So,
yeah. Anyway, in regards, so we'll see. Obviously, what happens with going forward.
That said,
go ahead.
Because we actually just both talked about the Panthers. Shout out the Chargers. Also 2-0. They're looking great. Jim Harbaugh, the way they want to play football, it's working. We're not relying on Herbert to do a whole lot, which is, I brought up a couple teams where I'm like, why are we throwing the ball with Anthony Richardson all this time? The Chargers are the complete opposite. When the ground game is working, they ran it 44 times in that game. They only let Herbert throw 20. And Herbert's a far better quarterback than Anthony Richardson. It's just, that's the scheme. That's how we're going to play football. Take notes, Indianapolis, because for the Chargers, it's working. It was the Panthers. We're not going to sit here and act like it was the greatest win in the world, but they're 2-0, and it's working.
Yeah, and I'm trying to make this point short because it's been a point I've been alluding to pretty much, and I'm going to keep doing it. It just seems like these first 2 weeks, teams that are able to run the ball are having success. And I think I saw Dominique Foxworth. He made a great point on like a Levitard show when he was on today. He mentioned like a lot of the league, especially defenses, I think we've seen they've caught up. Like a lot of teams are.
Well, to that point, to your point of defenses catching up, I saw a stat that in terms of the passing touchdowns through 2 games, over the last, I think, 8 years that I saw. This is the lowest, and it's not even close.
Yes.
I think before Monday night, so I don't know. I think Kirk threw one and Jalen both threw one, right?
Yeah, they both threw one. Yeah.
So before that, it was 66 total passing touchdowns. If they both threw one, that's 68. The next lowest over the last 8 years was like 88.
Yeah.
So it's like 20 touchdowns, passing touchdowns less through 2 weeks over the last 8 years. So clearly defenses, whatever the offensive schemes that have really taken hold, the Shanahan scheme, that roots back to like the Washington days with Mike Shanahan and all those guys, all these different coordinators that have like taken the league by storm. And we're still seeing those guys have success. Don't get me wrong. Those guys are still the top of the top. But all of the rest of the league trying to take from those guys, clearly the defenses have started to figure some of that out. And even with those Shanahan guys, like we just talked about with the Vikings and how they were able to get that win, some of that stuff is starting to be realized and figured out for sure by defenses.
Yeah. So I think I want to add that. So the point I was trying to make too was like, or add to that was a lot of teams seem like they have multiple pass rushers. They had all these There's been a lot more of these DBs. I know they're not like sitting amazing, but I feel like defensive backs are a lot deeper and better ideas. I remember that video you sent me last year about how teams were kind of letting the flat, attacking the flats per se. I forgot what exactly was the phrase they used, but letting them have the 2-3 yard pass, but being right there, basically being there to slow that down and just suppress the offense and eliminate some of these big plays on top of some of the other things. So anyway, we'll keep talking about some of these things going forward, but it just seems like, it is the teams that are more willing to be balanced, lean on the run game, have had success, and using the run game to build a pass game. It just seems like this year, thus far, you're not going to be able. Teams aren't able just to set up the pass, like the big passes, the big plays, pass plays, especially with some of the short ones, like we kind of saw the last couple of years as well. And even then, it's always kind of the teams that have always been able to maximize play action off their run game, like the Niners. You mentioned some of those schemes. I've been around the league. Have usually been more successful. I mean, heck, we're even seeing the Chiefs. They have been more run heavy the past couple of years, and obviously more emphasis on the interior on both sides of the ball.
Right.
So, nonetheless, great game for the Chargers. Sorry, Chargers, didn't mean to take up your time. Only one thing I add: shout out J.K. Dobbins. Maybe he's back. We'll see. Just great to see him balling out basically, and off that injury. And it'll be interesting to see if the Chargers can keep this formula up.
Listen, I saw a tweet that said J.K. Dobbins could barely walk in Baltimore, and now he's doing front flips into the end zone. What happened to him? So we love to see it for J.K. Dobbins. Also, I want to shout out Quentin Johnston because I was very high on him out of the draft. Once again, not a crazy game because week one, I said the same thing. Not a crazy game, but 5 catches, 51 yards. He got 2 touchdowns. He's making an impact, which he did not do at all his rookie year. So shout out to him because I'm still holding out hope that maybe he can be the receiver I thought he'd be when he got drafted.
And I will say, like, once again, a little bit preemptive of us as a community, or people in general, just reacting to that because it really is. She had to fix those drops, and so far, I'm gonna knock on wood, he hasn't dropped much. No brutal drops.
5 of his 6 targets.
That's all really he had to fix. Like, he was getting open last year. It's just that he had some brutal drops this year. Not the case so far. So good for him. And we'll see if they can keep building upon that success with Harbaugh. But anyway, let's go on over to the AFC, back to an AFC matchup. This one was very lackluster, despite these two teams having high expectations going into this year. The Cleveland Browns, they beat the Jaguars on the road, 18-13, ruining the whole, they call it like Trevor Banks Stadium, whatever they tried to rename it, because he got that big contract, which, listen, I'm all for Trevor getting the big contract, but the whole, like, changing your stadium name thing, that, I don't know who thought, no offense to who cooked it up, kind of dumb, and doesn't help that you lost on that day. But anyhow, what were your thoughts in regards to this one?
The Jaguars are now sitting at 0-2 in 2 winnable games. It felt like the first week, the game against Miami, they threw their chance away. They play a Cleveland Browns team that is coming off a horrendous performance against Dallas in week 1. Very clearly looked like they were incompetent on a lot of what it came to playing football. And Jacksonville was not able to take advantage. Offensively, Trevor Lawrence under 50% completion percentage. ETN had a decent game, but it wasn't like a massive one. Tank Bigsby unfortunately gets injured and has to miss this one. Has basically no impact whatsoever after a pretty solid week 1 showing. So I don't know. And receiving wise, it really felt like they had a couple big plays, but that was kind of it when it came to their passing yards. Like Brian Thomas has 2 catches for 94 yards. One of them is a 66 yarder. The other one's like, what is that, 28 yarder? And so 2 big plays, but that's kind of it for him in terms of the receiving game. Christian Kirk, 1 catch for -1 yards on 3 targets. Wasn't able to do much. Unfortunately, they're missing Evan Ingram, and him and Kirk have kind of been like the short yardage underneath middle of the field type of guys. Brenton Strange doing a valiant effort trying to fill in for Evan Ingram, but once again, it was kind of explosive plays. 3 catches for 65. One of them was 30 yards. So they were able to get explosive plays clearly against the Browns defense, but otherwise Cleveland was able to hold strong. And for Cleveland, I think this is the way they got to play football. This is how they got to win. They need to look like the Pittsburgh-esque type of system where we're not asking Deshaun Watson to go out there and throw for 5 touchdowns. We're not asking for our defense to, completely take over the game. We just need to make sure the offense on the other side is not able to get into 3rd and short situations. We need to make sure that we can get a turnover or 2. And then on offense, we're going to run the ball a lot. And we're going to play sound football, complementary football, not turn it over, and you get those wins. So I liked what I saw to Cleveland in this one. I thought it was a good bounce-back game. The running game over there is weird because obviously Chubb's out. And I think, did Jerome Ford get injured or something?
I don't think he got injured. Let me double check. But I know
I'm just confused because he had 7 carries for 64 yards.
I think they just rode.
Donta Foreman got way more. I don't know why.
I think I'm assuming it's a game plan thing. Because I think I noticed that too while it was happening live. No, Ford's healthy, so I think it's just maybe something that they're like, this is a Deontay Ford. This is your day where you're just going to do all the. Because granted, like I say, he was less efficient, but maybe that's what they're trying to do was make Ford be the more change of pace. Kind of like the Pollard Zeke situation, for a lack of better phrase, I guess, until Chubb comes back, where it's like, all right, Deontay, you're gonna get all the dirty work, and then Jerome, big moments, big plays, you'll go in, and hopefully, you'll be fresher for to be more explosive.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't mind it that much because, with Cleveland, they've got the offensive line to do it, and it worked. And like I said, they played complementary football. They did not turn the ball over and mess themselves over. So, yeah, good win for Cleveland. They definitely needed this because you don't want to be an 0-2 hole like Jacksonville is. Because now for Jacksonville, when you look at the future schedule, you're wondering like, okay, where are the wins? Where are the wins coming? Because they do have some tough games ahead. They've got to go to Buffalo, I don't know if it's in Buffalo. No, it is. They got to go to Buffalo on Monday night next week. Then they got to play Houston. Like those are probably the 2 toughest teams of the 4 games they've played. And there's a realistic scenario where Jacksonville's coming out 0-4.
Yeah.
So and even after that, sure, you got Colts, Chicago, Patriots. But as we've seen, those teams, the Colts were right there with the Texans week 1. The Bears have been right there both of their games. Patriots have been right there both of their games. So it's not like these are easy games. And then after that, you go back to Green Bay. You've got Philadelphia. You've got Detroit on the schedule. You've got Houston again. So for the Jags, they definitely need to figure some things out here because if you come out of this 4-game stretch and you're 0-4, it's going to be a very tough hole for them to dig themselves out of, especially with the way that their offense has been looking because they're not taking advantage of their opportunities.
Yeah, I think very interesting. I don't know what exactly the issue, but I will note it. I just want to point out we saw a very similar kind of trend. Obviously, it was a little more highs in regards to Doug Peterson and his regime in Philadelphia. The big year they won, with that, but then especially when Frank Reich left, but even then, maybe it could be a Doug Peterson thing. Next few years were very underwhelming, especially on offense where they had talent. And now in Jacksonville, is this Trevor's 4th year, right? I'm trying to blank.
Yeah, 5th, 4th or 5th.
But regardless, I mean, we saw the first year a bounce back, especially from this Trevor Lawrence's rookie year. Granted, it was with Urban Meyer, so you can only really go up from there. But nonetheless, we saw good things. It was okay, we see what they're building, but it's not great that last year was a disappointment. Now, granted, you could say Trevor was hurt, but not hurt right now. And you paid. I'm gonna throw shade at Trevor because he wasn't really great this game, and it seems like oftentimes he's just trying to make the big play. Once again, I'm not sure if this is a scheme thing, but sustaining drives was, like you alluded to, an issue. And they've acquired talent for the offensive line, just hasn't gelled. And even then, I've never been in love with Doug Peterson's run game and play action either. So, and play action design off that. So maybe that's a factor as well. So, and then, they had opportunities just like this game, but they had, unfortunately, a missed field goal. And then honestly, that safety was not great either. But obviously, if they, like I said, if they don't miss the field goal earlier, all three phases, maybe they don't. Like I said, with the Lions game, could be very different in regards to, hey, maybe the Jaguars just have to kick. They're at the Cleveland 33 for the last play before it was a Hail Mary. So in theory, maybe that's about a 55 yarder, which most kickers should be able to make. But yeah, very tough for Jacksonville. A little bit what I'm going to allude to later. Like, what is their? I don't know what they're good at in offense. Like we know they have talent, but are they? They're not really a run heavy team. They're not really a great passing team as we're seeing. They're not a dissected passing team. So we'll see. Like you mentioned, they got to figure it out fast because the next two games are rough. Buffalo, especially because Buffalo has 3 extra days to prepare since Buffalo played Thursday night. So, tough loss for Jacksonville. Desperate need of that one. Browns got it instead as the Browns stay alive. And yeah, like you said, just a good formula of stealing that from the Ravens, of just managing the game and, limiting Deshaun Watson per se. But anyhow, speaking of the Ravens, let's go to them because they were on a side of an upset and a pretty bad stat that I'm sure everyone's seen about, having 10-point leads. They apparently blew another one under John Harbaugh as they lose 26-23 against the Raiders at home, by the way, too, to fall to 0-2. So what were your thoughts here, John, in regards to this big upset by the Raiders?
Yeah, it was definitely a big one, and Gardner Minshew doing Gardner Minshew things. I said it before the season. A lot of people seem to be writing off Devontae Adams, but Gardner Minshew, if there's one thing I learned about him last year in Indianapolis, is that he will force feed his playmakers, and that's what he did. 12 targets to Devontae. He caught 9 of them for 110 and a touchdown. 9 targets to young stud Brock Bowers. He catches all 9 of them for 98 yards. And both of their playmakers there are looking good. The big concerning thing, I think, for the Raiders is still the run game is incredibly inefficient. Zamir White, only 9 carries, 24 yards. Nobody else really made much of an impact outside of that. And so if they could get the run game going, I feel like they actually have a pretty decent offense because, once again, Minshew, like he's a very serviceable starter and, will get the ball to his playmakers, which is really what you want. So I'd love to see a little bit more of the run game there, but in terms of the win here, it was a really big one. You're playing against Baltimore at Baltimore, and you had to have some late game heroics in the fourth quarter in order to make the win happen. I loved what I saw out of the Raiders, and they're sitting at 1-1. Meanwhile, for Baltimore, they're now 0-2, similar to what we just talked about Jacksonville, and they've got to go play Dallas, who just got beaten in their own right, so maybe they're going to want to have a bounce back game. And so that's a huge one for both teams because if the Ravens win, they're both 1-2. If the Cowboys win, they're sitting at 0-3, which Baltimore is a great team, and I think they can absolutely pull themselves out of it. But it's just not a hole that you want to be in. So for the Ravens, this felt like the first game in which Derrick Henry was, first game, it's been 2, but where he was really able to get going on the ground. Zay Flowers was involved. Mark Andrews was involved. I'd love to see a little bit more Mark Andrews. And honestly, I'd like to see more Likely, too. He only had 3 targets, and we saw week 1 against the Chiefs. He was able to be a huge playmaker for them. I'd like to see both of them get involved a lot more, those 2 tight ends, because I think they can both be huge difference makers for the Ravens. That said, on the other side of the ball, on defense, I don't know if you saw this clip. There was a clip on Twitter where people were not happy with Marlon Humphrey, considering the performance that Devontae Adams was able to have. They were saying that he was not putting in a lot of effort. And I do think it's maybe something to start talking about with the Ravens secondary. We're not going to overreact because we're only through 2 weeks, but they're giving up big plays, which I do think is concerning.
Yeah, I think it's something we mentioned in our before the season. It's like, hey, new defensive coordinator, Zach Orr. He's been there, been a rising guy, in the ranks, but his first year as head honcho. So maybe that's, something that they got to iron out there. I think and I already mentioned our criticisms. Like, I know they got Gardner Minshew, they sacked him 5 times, but I feel like a lot of that was early. Once the Raiders kind of settled in, especially Minshew, getting the ball out quick to Bowers, and then even at times quick to Adams or just finding Devontae Adams, that worked out. But yeah, in regards to Baltimore, it's a little bit what I alluded to with Jacksonville. Like, kind of what is their identity? But I think it's a little more of like, what is your style? Like, it just seems like we would think that they would lean into the run game more, and this may be why they're not running to the run game. Is the interior offensive line not great? We did see that, at times. I know Henry was efficient for statistically, but especially in critical moments when they had to put the game away, they just had some blunders, whether it be false starts by Henry himself, which is very rare for a running back, or Lamar getting sacked on literally on a drop back, and then now you have to pass the next 2 downs, and or it's a little obvious you're gonna try to run out the clock, and it's hard to convert when you're running twice, when you have to run a second and third down when it's 2nd and 19.
Right.
So it's just something that it's a little bit troubling too, because the way they do like to play the physical, hey, we're gonna run the ball and such and try to eat clock and lean our defense. It can lead to these type of blown leads where hey, the other team, they get going and your offense never really gets going or has a flow. So we'll see. Obviously they got a couple new toys there. In the second year of Zay Flowers, good to see him involved. But and like you said, like likely we know he's a talent, and Mike Andrews still there as well. So it's something that Monk and the offense are just gonna have to figure out to keep the rhythm and flow going. I'm not too concerned. I'm not as concerned maybe with like Jacksonville, for example, just because we know there's more proven talent, and I think there's a lot more just better overall in regards to that, and Ravens can figure it out too. I feel like I'm a little more confident in John Harbaugh, despite I don't know where all this John Harbaugh slander. I don't know if you've seen it too, like on those on all the posts about them blowing leads, like, oh man, Harbaugh, he's just like Mike Tomlin. But it's like, man, like all Harbaugh's done is be great for like what 12, 15 years.
Yeah, if you want to say he's just like Mike Tomlin and the fact that these are two of the greatest coaches in the league and they have been for over a decade, sure, I agree. Yeah, I would agree.
They've endured more quarterback changes. I mean, the transition to Flacco to Lamar was not, it was not easy in concept, and because Flacco was still in that big contract, and then they drafted Lamar at the end of the first round. They had to strip the Band-Aid off there.
The way you build an offense around Flacco and Lamar is the polar opposite. Flacco's not a mobile quarterback.
Yeah, he was a statue. And then, and then all this, they lost defense, like even revamping the defense over time. And so I don't get the slander. I think Ravens will be fine. Just got to figure this out. And for the Raiders, great old win, like you mentioned. Good for Antonio Pierce and the gang, kind of proven, like we mentioned, that they're going to be a tough out. They may sink into the playoffs, and this is always going to be a scrappy team going forward. So really emboldening that identity. But let's move on over to a game that was not close, as the Arizona Cardinals, they just absolutely dominated the poor LA Rams. Rams dealing with more injuries, but the Cardinals win here 41-10. Seems like Kyler is back, John. What were your thoughts here?
The Cardinals, I will say, through 2 games, the Buffalo game, I talked about it, the scoring output was a little inflated by the kickoff return, but they're looking real good. James Conner is having a great start to the season. Kyler is looking great, and the one thing that I really love about the way that Kyler's playing right now is that he's got the good mix of running and passing. Like it doesn't feel like he's doing too much of one or the other. He's not forcing the run. He's looking like a composed passer, willing to stay in the pocket, rolling out when needed to, and he only takes off when it's there. He's taking off for big chunks. It's not like a little 2-yard rush. He's trying to make the plays happen. And the key here was he finally got Marvin Harrison Jr. involved. He had 8 targets, 4 of them he caught, 130 yards, 2 touchdowns. Both of those came in the first quarter. So clearly they heard all the noise. They said Marvin only, he didn't do a lot last week. We're going to hear all that. And guess what? We're going to come out and we're going to absolutely torch the Los Angeles Rams secondary. And the one thing that really stood out to me here was the Rams were not able to get pressure on Kyler whatsoever. And they talked about it on the broadcast, but when you don't have Aaron Donald, who's been the big bad force behind the Rams for so long and has kind of been the bane of the Cardinals' existence, when he's not there, it felt like the Cardinals were like, let's go, dude. Like, heck yeah. Like the big bad boogeyman is gone. We can finally do what we want to do. And it worked. It worked on the ground. It worked through the air. Even when, James Conner wasn't rushing, the 2 rushes that Amari DiMercato had, he got a 41-yard carry. So finally, the Cardinals were able to play their style of offense that they wanted to against the Rams. And I will say, unfortunately for the Rams, weren't able to do much on the other side. And, I liked that they got Blake Corum more involved, but the run game was completely shut down by Arizona's defensive line, which I was very impressed by, because that was one of the big things that we were very concerned about, was just in general, can Arizona show up defensively pretty much at all? They really did in this one, but unfortunately for the Rams, not only did Puka go down the previous week, but now Cooper Kupp goes down, and all reports are that he might be going on IR as well. So it's a bad season, getting even uglier for the Rams in a very unfortunate way.
Yeah, and on top of that, I know one of their starting tackles is on IR also, and before this game, I believe the other one was out too. I won't be shocked if they're on IR as well. So yeah, health for the Rams not great right now, and that doesn't help. The only thing I have to say is in regards to their defense, like the Rams defense, we kind of alluded to this fear, and once again, just kind of reinforced my point about teams being able to run the ball. Kudos to the Cardinals. They were balanced. James Conner, 21 carries, 122 yards. So that helps in regards to the pass game. We saw Kyler was able to hit a few explosive pass plays off play action. Like, for example, I think, and even just had some great plays in general. Like you mentioned, I mean, first there's that dime to McBride on like that corner route. That was just great to see Kyler back to. And like we say all the time, especially me though, sometimes takes guys a little bit like it's not everyone's Adrian Pearson. They're not going to be themselves 1 year off an ACL tear. Sometimes it takes a little time. Sometimes guys don't even come back. But it was good to see Kyler basically back, and you saw that. And like you alluded to, they couldn't sack him. There's that one touchdown to Elijah Higgins where it was just a vintage Kyler. Or not only vintage, he's not even that hero level, but you know what I mean in regards to he's running around, just dodging everybody for like 4 or 5 seconds. No one can touch him. Yep. He resets, boom, throws the laser down the middle because Higgins is keeping the play alive. That's like one of the few plays where too. It's unfortunate. Rams didn't play much great defense. That's the time where like, man, your secondary, they did their job. They held on for 4 or 5 seconds, but didn't corral Kyler, and boom, you can only do what you can for so long. So yeah, great to see, like you mentioned, Harrison Jr. involved, and Trey McBride kind of building off the end of last year where he got going too. So I'm interested to see how if any other young guys are going to continue to step up, or in those ones keep growing and blossoming going forward. So great win, great dominant win too by the Cardinals. I don't think anyone had that in their bingo book, even if you were pro Cardinals, didn't think that that would happen. And we'll see what happens with the Rams here. Just poor Matthew Stafford. We'll see if he can. You lead Detroit. Yes, he did get this ring, but now you're potentially kind of back in the same situation like I put in our group chat, where not great defense. Unlike Detroit, the talent that he does around him is just getting hurt. So we'll see if he can stay upright and if they can kind of piece it together. But at least, and I know they had it this year, at least they have the first round draft pick. So anyway, let's move on over. I'm assuming this one will be quick, as this was not very much pretty of a game. But hey, it's the Steelers. What did we expect? As the Steelers go on the road to beat the Broncos 13-6 and Steeler fashion, what were your thoughts here in regards to this one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go on a whole rant again because I said it last week, it's Steelers football. This is what they want to do. They want to play good defense. They want to run the ball a lot. They don't want to make Justin Fields do too much. And they're going to win the game through defense and special teams and maybe the occasional touchdown. They scored their first touchdown of the season, so that was good for them. Meanwhile, on the other side, the Broncos, apart from Bo Nix, because obviously Bo Nix, he deserves his criticisms. He's a rookie. He once again looks nervous. He's trying to rush things, throwing picks. The run game is completely irrelevant for Denver. Like Javonte Williams, 11 carries for 17 yards. Absolutely brutal performance. He got involved in the receiving game, so that was good. But then like Jaleel McLaughlin, also terrible. 3 carries for 6 yards. And that's what happened week 1. Both of them looked awful week 1. Both of them look awful here. So I don't know if this is a scheme thing. I don't know if this is the 2 running backs just not being good. I don't know if this is the offensive line, but they can't run the ball at all. Like so you want to talk about, trying to get Bo Nix going. The first week I criticized them for not running it enough. And this time, 11 carries for 17 yards. I wouldn't want to keep running if that was happening either. Like Bo Nix is their leading rusher through 2 games. And part of that can definitely be scheme, but even the limited opportunities that the running backs are getting, they're not taking advantage of it at all. Like it's brutal. So they have to figure something out, because this is another game which Bo Nix is throwing the ball way too many times. He threw it 35 times in this game. Last week, I think he threw it like 40-something times. That's just not a recipe for winning for Denver. They need to if they're going to be this kind of a team, they have to be one that's similar to Pittsburgh, where we're not throwing the ball a lot. We allow our quarterback to be largely efficient, and we try to run the ball down their throats. The only issue is that when they do run, they're not taking the most of their opportunities, and then they get in these holes and they just start going away from it completely. So I don't know what's going on over there with Sean Payton, that offense, but it is looking brutal in all fashions. Even like Cortland Sutton, the guy who's supposed to be the number 1 receiver, 1 catch for 26 yards. Like it's just not good enough. It's not good enough. Greg Dulcich, too, a tight end that I thought had problems. He had 2 terrible drops. Like it just feels like, once again, Bo Nix deserves the criticism. By no means am I saying that he's playing great, But I actually watched more of this game than I got to watch the previous one when they played Seattle. It just, everything was going wrong. There'd be a holding penalty, and now it's 3rd and long when it should have been. Like, there'd be a brutal drop from one of the receivers. The running backs aren't getting any progress on the ground. So it's like, I'm hard pressed to sit here and say that Bo's the problem, even though, on the stat sheet, sure, 2 interceptions, not great completion percentage, all those kind of things. Bo's not looking great, but neither is anybody else, which is just not a recipe for anybody to be good.
Yeah, so I don't have much else to add. I mean, we'll see how Denver moves forward. Like we said, this is a big year for Sean Payton and them, so maybe some growing pains. Also, only other thing I want to add, like, I like Jaleel McLaughlin, but I feel like this whole running back split too. And once again, we talk about ACL. Not everybody comes back the same. We'll see about Javonte. Doesn't help. Yeah, this just seems all like a bit of a mess for the Broncos right now. And yeah, I know. Yeah, like you said, Bo absolutely deserves criticism, but so does everybody. Like, it's just a bad performance all around that they've been showing thus far. So we'll see if they can adjust. But yeah, I don't have much else to add for Pittsburgh. Like you said, it's typical Pittsburgh football. This is what they live for. They like these in the trenches, ugly games. This is what they want, because they feel like they're going to out execute you for the most part and such. And yeah, this was a prime example of that. So kudos to them. And although I wasn't a huge fan of the whole Petty giving the game ball to Russell Wilson, I understand the thought, but Russell didn't play.
Come on, he didn't even play.
You had your chance last year, Russell. You blew it. So
yeah. If anybody deserves the game ball for that game, you got to give it to somebody on defense. Like, go give it to T.J. Watt, or Alex Highsmith had a great game. He had a sack. Like, go give it to one of those guys.
Maybe, yeah, someone. Anyway, so there's that. Steelers take care of the business. Let's go on to the last game of the Sunday afternoon. Probably the most exciting game, more watched, as the Kansas City Chiefs, they eke out a win over the Cincinnati Bengals, 26-25. What were your thoughts here?
For Kansas City, the tough storyline is that Pacheco comes out of this game with an injury, and it sounded like he might be going on IR and missing at least 4 games. I don't know the official diagnosis or anything like that yet.
Broken fibula, so I think they said it's probably going to be like 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, so that sucks, because he's really been a key component of this offense for quite some time. That said, they've got that kid Carson Steele, who runs in a very similar angry fashion as Pacheco does, so maybe he can make some things happen. They signed Kareem Hunt today. Familiarity with the organization, hasn't been there for a long time, so I'm not going to sit here and act like he knows the playbook or anything like that, but he's been a key contributor for Cleveland for quite some time for the last few years, so we'll see how he can get involved. They got the veteran Samaje Perine, so I think they have the pieces to make it work. It just might be a lot less of one guy doing it all like Pacheco did, and being a 3-down back, and more of, okay, maybe we get Steele involved in the early stuff, we get Kareem Hunt kind of involved in everything, and Perine can be involved in the passing game, and be there for 3rd downs, because he's also a lot more trusted when it comes to pass blocking than maybe a rookie would be. So I think they'll be okay on the run game. In the receiving game, Rashee Rice is starting to look like a star. He's been the reason that the passing offense is going. Other than that, there's really nothing great. I'm starting to get a little concerned about Travis Kelce and his involvement. It's not good at all. He's been doing nothing through 2 games so far. They need to get him going because of how important he's been. And I refuse to believe that Travis Kelce, even though last year he was, took a little bit of a dip, is all of a sudden just useless. I don't believe that whatsoever. The Bengals did a good job limiting Xavier Worthy from having a lot of explosive plays, so they need somebody outside of Rashee Rice to step up, because clearly if he's the only one getting it done, then the offense is going to look brutal, especially with Pacheco not being there for the next handful of games, because Pacheco was really the reason that I felt like they were able to do a lot in this game and come out with the win. So shout out to that for the Kansas City Chiefs. For the Bengals, I thought they played a heck of a game. Shout out to their tight ends, because Gesicki, Eric All, and Drew Sample all made major impacts in this one. Yosivas, he's not a rookie, but 2nd-year receiver out of Yale, he got 2 touchdowns, only 7 yards on those 2 catches, but he got 2 touchdowns, so he made an impact for sure in the absence of T. Higgins. The big question mark, I feel like, for Cincinnati is, number 1, the Zach Moss-Chase Brown split. Didn't love what I saw out of Zach Moss in this one. 12 carries for 34 yards. Meanwhile, Chase Brown only 4 carries for 31 yards. It feels like I would try to maybe make it more of a 50-50, even though through 2 weeks it hasn't been at all. Chase Brown is definitely the more explosive of the two. I'm not saying to phase Zach Moss out by any means, but I do think that Chase Brown should be more involved than he currently is. And then also, Jamar Chase was not happy during this game. I mean, there was a moment where Joe Burrow was having to like push him off of him, like out on the field, because Jamar was getting so frustrated about everything that was happening. He was frustrated when it came to the refs and some of the calls they were making, and I think he was just frustrated in regards to how Kansas City was playing him. But that's what happens when you go against Kansas City. They know you're the playmaker. They're going to put Trent McDuffie on you, and it's going to be a tough game. So for Kansas City, they did enough to get the win. That's big. They're 2-0. And for Cincinnati, unfortunately for them, they needed this one because they're sitting in a similar hole to the Ravens where they're 0-2.
Yeah. Only one thing I want to add, Kansas City defense, once again, they're the unsung heroes, even they should be more sung. Fumble return. And they got to Joe Burrow 2 other times as well. And then they got that key fumble where, Joe Burrow kind of, I think that was the fumble return, right? Am I thinking? Sorry, I got a bunch of games in my head. Let me double check. Pretty sure it was scoop and score. Yeah, scoop and score. That was that same one where
and even on that, it was after Mahomes threw that interception. So it's what could have been a big momentum boost for Cincinnati. They scored a touchdown here. They're up 29-17 instead. Boom, right back to Kansas City's way.
Yeah, so exactly your point. Instead of it was literally game flipping. Instead of being behind the 8 ball, put Kansas City back in a power position, and obviously they were able to go down later in the game after the Bengals scored a field goal in their next drive. Kansas City put away a couple drives later. I do want to say, and this is just annoying me. Granted, I didn't watch the entirety of this full game, but obviously I watched the end in full. I know people hate the Chiefs for whatever reasons, so they do their beat success, which is kind of dumb, but nonetheless, I don't know how you feel, but that PI, yes, it was like 4th and 16, but it was PI. Like they called the same thing, which we'll talk about the Sunday night game in a second, but they called the same thing on Sunday night. The guy got there early, hit the receiver, and that's fair pass fair, especially in the playoffs. So, that's like, I don't know what you want to say. Like, and the Bengals still had opportunities to get a stop. Even after that, they couldn't. Or they let them get in the field goal range still even after that.
Yeah, I say the same thing every time people complain about this stuff, even when it's Cowboys fans. If you don't want the rest to become a factor, just play better, because Cincinnati was by no means immune to mistakes. Like, if we're being real, when Mahomes throws that first interception, Cincinnati capitalized to get a touchdown. Carson Steele had that one fumble, and on the Kansas City side of the field, they got 16 yards. Cincinnati did after that, and they got held to a field goal. So they could have capitalized on that even more, made it a much bigger lead. And then, like we just talked about, with that fumble touchdown. So Joe Burrow gets sacked. That's on the offensive line. That's on Burrow. And Kansas City's able to run it back for a touchdown. Like, they made their own mistakes when they should have been a lot better. And everybody's talking about the refs and all that stuff. But, that's you made a lot of mistakes. Don't make those mistakes. And there you go.
Yeah. So let me see. And even... Yeah, so anyway, like we talk about, Chiefs finding different ways to win the game, defense, run the ball. It will be interesting to see this transition, though, to potentially Carson Steele / Samaje Perine, because like you said, Steele did have the one fumble, and obviously there's going to be a drop-off going from him to Pacheco down to him. So, just good, tough, gritty win by Kansas City. That's something that they've grown accustomed to. On the Kelsey thing, too, just my opinion, just from what I've seen, I think we're hitting the end. Like, not saying he's going to be done, but we're hitting that back nine. He doesn't have the same. It just feels like when he does get the ball, he doesn't have the same like burst in regards to getting away from guys. Like, every time he does, it's like someone's on him, like, and gets him down, as opposed to like before where he was, he would be shaking, especially the agility. That's the thing I'm getting to, like because he was always great at reading zones and shaking guys, and quick little stutter double move, and then boom, he makes his cut. And Mahomes great getting the ball there. And then not only that, then the yak afterwards too. He was great at that. I'm assuming that's, I hate to say this, but it seems like Noah Gray's been the better option. Or at least it was a week one. Then obviously they've been going at kind of committee, even at tight end the past, it's going back into last year. So tough. We'll see how it goes. It's important to keep an eye on that. But obviously Kelsey's still a big face for them, and we'll see if they can get him more involved. But anyhow, let's go to Sunday night. This one was also like the theme pretty much of week 2 and going on right now. Very defensive especially as the game went on. Houston wins 19-13 over the Bears. What were your thoughts here in regards to the Texans getting the win?
It was a great win for the Texans. Unfortunately for Chicago, the offense is still not looking good. We talked about the teams having success running the ball. They didn't. DeAndre Swift, 14 carries, 18 yards. Travis Homer had 1 for 6. Khalil Herbert only 2 for 3. He did get a touchdown, though. So Caleb Williams was really just the run game for them. And even then for Caleb Williams in the pass game, it seems very weird that, like, which I get he's a rookie, but it doesn't feel like they really want to unleash Caleb Williams at all. It feels like a lot of their offense is underneath, dump off type of stuff. Just not a lot of plays deep downfield or attempts deep downfield. I don't know if that's a Caleb thing or if that's a coaching thing as to why that's happening. But it feels like just in terms of their offense, like you pick this guy number 1 overall, everybody's touting him as like this big next thing. You got to have at least some confidence to let him throw downfield. Or if you're Caleb, somebody's got to get in here and be like, listen, buddy, like we got to start trying to take some shots, because they're not trying really at all to throw it deep. And I think that is limiting their offense and allowing the opposing defense to definitely creep up and try to play a lot more of the stuff underneath. So that's a concern. Other than that, I feel like Chicago's defense had a pretty solid day. They were able to limit the Texans for the most part outside of Nico Collins. He absolutely tore them a new one. 135 yards on 8 catches for a touchdown. CJ Stroud had a solid day as well. Once again, doing what CJ Stroud does and not turning the ball over. So yeah, I don't know. I thought it was a good game for both teams. I feel like, obviously Houston, definitely the better team, came out with the win here. Their defense looked good. I just think that for Williams, we need to figure out some of this stuff when it comes to throwing the deep ball, because even like the one time he threw it, I wouldn't say deep. It was like a 20-yard throw to DJ Moore. DJ got the outside leverage he wanted. Caleb just kind of underthrew it, and Derek Stingley was able to get the interception. So, yeah, I just think there's definitely some things that need to be cleaned up on Chicago's offense for sure.
Yeah, I will say in regards to that, this is not a really new thing under Eberflus. We kind of saw this with Justin Fields. So we're like, hey, are they going to open things up for Justin Fields? Or they're just going to have him just play the simplistic offense. So, and granted, it's a new OC, Shane Waldron, but I will say, as personally, I wasn't really a huge fan of Shane Waldron in Seattle, because guess what? It was kind of the similar things. Oh yeah, just because he came from Sean McVay doesn't mean he's Sean McVay and has all the all the tying the plays and the concepts. So I agree with you in regards to that. It's very conservative approach, and then and it felt like it was just on Caleb every now and then to make the throw happen. And you can see he tried, but obviously there weren't any designs to do so. It doesn't help too. You don't really have a run game to do any play action or even get one-on-one opportunities. And on top of that too, I mean, outside of DJ Moore, I know Rome Odunze is a talented rookie, but still a rookie, and even was dealing with a knee injury. Like, no one else really scares you right at this current moment on the Bears in terms of just beating guys one-on-one. So there's that stat where D'Amico Ryans, this was the most time they've ever blitzed in a game. It's because they're, like you said, they were fine with, okay, we just gotta watch for DJ Moore, and then we're just gonna make life rough for Caleb Williams. And it definitely was. He got sacked 7 times, and some of them not really on him, and he's trying to make plays. So yeah, I'm more leaning towards this is more of the coaching staff thing. And they got to figure it out. And Bears' interior offensive line not very good as well, as they got torn up. And even the line as a whole still kind of young, coming along, as well as Will Anderson had a couple. Like I said, there was a bad one where I don't think Will Anderson was touched. And I don't know if you remember that one. And Caleb was just literally just had no clue and just got blindsided, just blown up. So luckily he held onto the ball. And yeah, this shows the fact too that Caleb is their leading rusher. And he's not really a tuck it and run type of guy. When he does scramble, it's to extend the passing play and make a throw downfield as well. So I'm sure there's things that they have to iron out with their relatively young team. A lot of these pieces, like Rome Odunze still coming in. There's a running back room with DeAndre Swift. He's still new. Even though, like I said, their line's young, and obviously a new OC on top of that. So everyone's kind of on a learning curve. And like you said, though, at least the defense still great, kept them in this game. And we'll see if the offense can get going along. I'm not going to comment too much on Houston. They done their job. Nico Collins, awesome, like you said. I'm interested to see the status of Joe Mixon, because I'm with Joe Mixon. I mean, if they're going to make the hip drop, I don't even know if it's supposed to be a penalty or something. Regardless, they got to enforce it better. But no shocker. Like we've said many times in the podcast, NFL not really great about this stuff. So remember the terrible taunting penalties like 2-3 years ago, where like God forbid where you sack somebody and you did anything, it was an immediate flag. That was, or especially and still the roughing the passer, as we all know, still not a perfect science. But nonetheless, Houston, they're perfect so far. They are 2-0, and so thus far meeting the expectations given to them. But obviously, we got to see it going forward for them as well. But let's move on to the last but not least, the Monday night game as the Atlanta Falcons primetime Kirk. Maybe he's overcome these demons. We'll see, because he gets the win here. Him and the Falcons 22-21 over the Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia of all places. What were your thoughts here in regards to the Falcons getting the better of the Eagles?
The Eagles, man, I'm going to be very critical of Nick Sirianni here, because you talked about it earlier. I can't remember which team it was, but take your points. Yes. They did not do that on multiple occasions. Early on in the first half, I can't remember which drive it was.
It was their second offensive drive.
Yeah, their second offensive drive. It's 4th and 4. They decide to go for it. Take your points. Just go up 3-0. Take the lead. It's early in the game. There's no need to rush things. We're still in the first quarter. Take your points. Your defense had a great, stand in the first drive against the Falcons. Just take your points here. Instead, they don't. So a 10-play, 55-yard drive, they turn it over on downs. Then the rest of the game, they get the touchdown, they get in the lead, blah, blah, blah. Then late in the game, it felt like Sirianni, once again, kind of screwed him in the foot a little bit here, because on that field goal drive, it was their second to last drive of the game. On 3rd and 4, now this is also on Saquon. Saquon drops the ball. But on 3rd and 4, or maybe it was 3rd and 3, They have Jalen Hurts roll out. Saquon goes into the flat on the right side. They throw it to him. Saquon drops the ball. He should have caught it. If he did, that's a first down. We're going to be praising the play. So I'm not fully putting all the blame on Sirianni for that one, because it's somewhat results-based analysis there in terms of the fact that Saquon dropped it. Because if he catches it, that's a first down, game over. Unfortunately, he drops it, and so they have to take a field goal. But the problem there is the risk of throwing it. The incompletion or drop is a possibility. We didn't know that Saquon was going to be that wide open. He was, so some of it goes on him. But if you just run it there, you burn 40 seconds off of the clock, and then you take your field goal, and even then, you might have got the first down. It's 3rd and 3. Your offensive line and Saquon Barkley have been cooking all game. The previous 2 plays, 1st and 2nd down, Saquon got 4 yards and 3 yards. All you need is 3. He got those the previous 2 plays. I personally would have trusted him there in a situation to either close the game out, and if he doesn't close the game out, well, guess what? We just burned 40 seconds and we still get the field goal. So now they have to drive down and they got to get the touchdown. Well, unfortunately for Philadelphia, their secondary then on the other side of the ball, on that drive where they gave Atlanta the minute 46 left that they had, on that drive, they sat so far back and got absolutely cooked. They kept allowing passes on the sideline for 15 yards downfield. What are we doing? Like the Kyle Pitts went over the middle. We're okay with that, because now they're burning clock in order to, or they're going to burn it down if they want to, spike it. But then the Darnell Mooney pass on the sideline for 21 yards. What are we doing there? Then another Darnell Mooney pass on the sideline for 26 yards. Quinyon Mitchell, I know you're a rookie, but come on. Like, why are we giving him so much space? I don't know if that's the coaches or if that's on Mitchell. And then all of a sudden we're down at the end of the field. Oh, let's just throw another sideline pass to Drake London for 5 yards, get out of bounds. Oh, and then we throw a touchdown where Darius Slay gets absolutely cooked by a simple out route by Drake London in one-on-one coverage. The secondary for Philadelphia still seems to be an issue, despite the fact that they drafted these rookies, which historically corner one of those positions. It does take a little bit longer for the rookies to kind of like figure it out. We saw that with Jalen Ramsey his rookie year, and then he went on to become the best corner in the league for 5 years. So I'm not going to sit here and say this is all on Quinyon Mitchell or specifically him, but he didn't look great in that final drive. Darius Slay got cooked for the touchdown. The secondary is not looking good. They weren't able to get pretty much any pressure on Kirk Cousins in that play. Shout out to the Falcons, because I will say we saw a lot more play action in this game, and Kirk Cousins was moving, which you definitely want to see. Mm-hmm. But overall, it just felt like Philadelphia should have had this win. Even at the end of that touchdown drive, there was a minute 05 that they spent on that drive. They had a minute and 36 seconds, I believe, when they got the ball back. If we burn that 40 seconds off the clock, then at the very end of that drive, Atlanta has almost no time remaining. And so once I know it's results-based analysis, but it just felt like Philly should have won that game, and they made it a lot harder on themselves than they needed to be. And considering the state of their defense, too, with the way that secondary looked, they were looking good for most of the game. But that last drive, I'm just shocked that they didn't just burn that 40 seconds.
Yeah. All I want to add
and
is
taking the field goal earlier, too. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're good. All I want to add, too, like the field goal thing bothered me, too. You already went on that, so I'm not going to keep going because you hit all the points there. In regards to that final one, too, like even if it's 4th and short, guess what? We all know what Philly's great at. The tush push. Just to add on what you're saying, basically, like it's a little bit like, hey, what is your strength? The offensive line, the run game, your physicality. Play to your strength here. And we know, like, if there's a concern about Atlanta and like a weak point per se, it would probably be of that team, the front seven. That was a little bit surprising in regards to that, especially on a night where you don't have AJ Brown. So in theory, like, okay, Devonta had a good game, and Goddard, he had solid, but they had already kind of been leaning on them on Saquon and Jalen Hurts on the ground, like. It's close out the game. Like anyway. And in theory, they're still doing that with the pass, like you mentioned, but it's like that old saying, like, hey, when you pass the ball, three things can happen and 2 of them are bad. So there's that one. And like you said, it may help out. And like you said, in regards to defense, probably helps the defense when they only have, if they had just ran clock, maybe they don't go with tush push, get the field goal, then okay. They know that they have, like you said, under a minute left and Falcons have to go the length of the field. I imagine too they would have been able to be in more favorable spots as opposed to a minute 40. Atlanta can afford to throw the ball, like you said, a couple times in the middle of the field. It'd be to Pitts to start, and then hit a couple shots to Mooney. It's tough, and then obviously you have those little plays to London as well. So, tough loss for the Eagles. Feels kind of on par with their brand though, especially in recent history. We saw the end of last year they lost some games that they probably shouldn't have, like the Seattle game as well. So. If you remember that one with Drew Lock at quarterback. So, it'd be interesting to see if they move going forward. And obviously the status of AJ Brown, because obviously this is a game where I feel like they kind of missed him because he's like Devontae is very good short to intermediate. They've kind of found a good way to use him, but we know that AJ Brown can do that, but he's their alpha in regards to being the receiving threat, and probably would have made life easier on everyone else if he was there. So that'd be interesting to see going forward for the Eagles. But that. I don't have much else to say on the Falcons. I mean, good win. Great to see that these playmakers like Drake London. I know it wasn't an amazing game for Kyle Pitts, but at least he's not being used as a decoy, and we're seeing a good amount of Bijan Robinson as well. So better, and good first win for Raheem Morris. Deserved there for him as well. But anything else you want to mention on this game or in general?
Once again, that trend of passing touchdowns kind of being down around the league. I am interested to see how that looks this upcoming week because our defense is catching up, our offense is starting slow. It's still early, so we don't really want to overreact to anything because as we saw, specifically with Marvin Harrison Jr., terrible week 1, absolute baller week 2. So anything could still happen.
Yeah, still very early. I do want to point out too, and I'm not saying this is like hopeful like this happens, but it just does happen. Like more injuries are going to happen. So therefore, especially on defense, I feel like on offense it's a little bit easy. It's not always easy, but it's usually easier to kind of make up for that. Well, on defense, okay, now you got the third string guy who's probably a third string because you don't trust that he knows all the rules or is consistent. Maybe by week 8, dang, we got to rely on third string guy for 60% of the plays against Mahomes and them. It's just a mess. So, or now we're down to our third or fourth edge rush. We got people know how injuries work. So that's probably that may help going forward. But it is interesting, like you mentioned. It'll be interesting to see if that trend goes forward because I don't mind it. Makes for some competitive, interesting games. Still, maybe not as much fireworks and such.
Definitely makes the fantasy matchups sometimes brutal to look at when nobody's doing well.
I think this is the last point. This year, I think I'm doing good so far. I want to say so far for most of my leagues. I think what helps too is sometimes, at least for me right now, is just my teams. I try not to have too many out of one offense. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I'm trying to diversify my, they say put on all player eggs, one basket. I think that's helping for me. I know our dynasty league's not a great example, but even in our redraft too, I feel like sometimes that Sometimes it's good to double dip, but I feel like, especially this year, like you mentioned, with how kind of wild and variable it's been thus far, it's like, kind of put your eggs in different baskets. Because like George Pickens, great week 1. This week, he only had like 2 for 24.
I will say on the George Pickens thing, he actually had a couple of huge plays in that game that unfortunately got called back. Yeah, he drew a huge PI. That was big, but he had like a 50-yard touchdown get called back because of some offensive thing that was brutal because it was a heck of a play over Pat Surtain, and they also had a touchdown that got called back as well. So at least in fantasy, he would have done a lot better. He would have had like 80 yards and a touchdown if both of those stood. But apart from that, and talking about the put all your eggs in different baskets, I got a buddy who in one league has Puka and Cooper Kupp. So yeah,
and that's what's tough. Where I like anyway. So I'm like, because I once again, beginning of the year, wouldn't blame you for that. That sounds like a really good duo to go forward with.
Yeah, just unfortunate.
So we'll see how everyone does, how everyone weathers the storm. By the way, before we call it, just update in regards to the spreads and all that, which I'll be sure to do it next episode as well. Last week, John, you were negative 320. Like I said, unfortunately, the Dallas and San Francisco were huge losses for you. And then I was plus 300. And then record-wise, though, we were the same, ironically. I said it too. I said we had 4 differences. We're going to split them down the middle. I didn't want to split them down the middle, but we did split them down the middle, ironically. Darn it, Seattle and Jacksonville. Because, anyway. But that'll do it for us. We'll be back later in the week to make our picks against spread, of course, for all of the week 3 games and such. But otherwise, that's going to do it for John and myself. We will see you all next time. Adios.